Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez had seen enough death in Afghanistan to last 3 lifetimes, but nothing prepared him for what he would witness on that foggy Tuesday morning in rural Montana. The 28-year-old Marine veteran had moved to the small town of Millerville after his discharge, seeking peace in the rolling hills and endless sky that stretched beyond his modest cabin. His only companion was Kaiser, a 3-year-old German shepherd he had adopted from a military working dog program. Kaiser was more than just a pet. The intelligent canine had been trained in search and rescue operations before a minor injury ended his military career. Marcus found comfort in the dog's disciplined nature and unwavering loyalty. Together, they would take long walks through the dense pine forests that surrounded their property, both men and animal finding solace in the quiet wilderness after years of chaos and conflict. On this particular morning, Marcus was chopping firewood behind his cabin when Kaiser began acting strangely. The dog's ears perked up and he started whining in a way Marcus had never heard before. It was not the excited whine of spotting a squirrel or the alert bark that signaled a stranger approaching. This was different, urgent, almost human-like in its desperation. Kaiser paced back and forth, looking toward the forest and then back at Marcus, his brown eyes filled with what could only be described as distress. Marcus set down his axe and watched his companion carefully. In their 18 months together, Kaiser had never displayed such behavior. The dog was trained to remain calm under pressure, yet here he was practically trembling with anxiety. Marcus trusted the animal's instincts completely. During his tours overseas, he had worked with military dogs whose keen senses had saved countless lives by detecting hidden explosives and warning of enemy presence. Following Kaiser's gaze toward the tree line, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Through the morning mist, barely visible between the towering pines, was what appeared to be a human figure hanging motionless from a thick branch. The shape was too far away to make out clearly, but the unnatural stillness and the angle of the form left little doubt about what they were witnessing. Marcus grabbed his cell phone, but the screen showed no signal bars. The remote location that provided him with the peace he craved also meant that cellular coverage was spotty at best. His landline was inside the cabin, but every second counted if there was any chance the person was still alive. Kaiser was already moving toward the forest, looking back at Marcus with urgent eyes that seemed to say, time was running out. Without hesitation, Marcus sprinted toward his truck, Kaiser bounding alongside him. They had to get closer to assess the situation and determine if this was a rescue mission or a recovery operation. As they raced through the forest on the winding dirt road, Marcus's mind flashed back to his military training. He had been part of several emergency response situations during his service, and the protocol was always the same: secure the scene, assess for signs of life, and provide immediate aid if possible. The truck bounced over roots and rocks as Marcus navigated the narrow forest path. Kaiser sat rigid in the passenger seat, his nose pressed against the window, still whining softly. The fog was beginning to lift as the sun climbed higher, and Marcus could see more clearly now. What had appeared to be a hanging victim from a distance was indeed a person suspended from a rope around their neck, completely motionless against the backdrop of ancient pine trees. Marcus parked the truck about 50 yards away and approached on foot with Kaiser at his side. The scene before them was disturbing beyond description. A middle-aged man hung lifeless from a thick rope tied to a sturdy branch about 12 feet off the ground. His face was purple and swollen, his tongue protruding slightly. Everything about the scene suggested they were too late to save this person's life. But Kaiser was behaving even more strangely now. Instead of the typical behavior Marcus would expect from a search and rescue dog who had located a deceased person, Kaiser was frantically circling the base of the tree, sniffing the ground and whimpering. The dog's training should have led him to sit and alert, signaling the discovery. Instead, Kaiser seemed agitated, almost fearful, as if he sensed something that Marcus could not yet perceive. Marcus approached the hanging figure slowly, his military training taking over as he scanned the surrounding area for any signs of danger. The forest was eerily quiet except for the soft rustling of pine needles in the gentle morning breeze. Kaiser continued his frantic circling, occasionally stopping to paw at specific spots on the ground where the earth appeared disturbed. As Marcus got closer, he could see that the man appeared to be in his early 50s. wearing a faded flannel shirt and worn jeans. A wooden step stool lay on its side several feet away from the base of the tree, seemingly kicked away in the final moments. Everything about the scene suggested a suicide, but something felt wrong. Marcus had seen enough death to trust his instincts, and those instincts were screaming that this was not what it appeared to be. The rope around the man's neck was tied with a noose knot, but the execution was sloppy, almost amateurish. During his time in the military, Marcus had learned various knot-tying techniques, and this particular knot looked wrong somehow. Additionally, the man's hands showed what appeared to be rope burns and defensive wounds on his knuckles, as if he had been fighting for his life rather than ending it voluntarily. Marcus reached for his cell phone again, hoping the slightly elevated position might give him better reception. Still no signal. He would need to drive back toward town to call for help, but he was reluctant to leave the scene unattended. Kaiser's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, and Marcus feared his dog might be picking up scents or sounds that indicated they were not alone in these woods. Suddenly, Kaiser stopped his frantic circling and froze, his body rigid and his ears pointed toward a dense thicket about 30 yards away. The dog's hackles were raised and a low growl rumbled deep in his throat. Marcus immediately dropped into a defensive crouch, his hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm he no longer carried. Old habits from combat zones died hard, and every fiber of his being was now on high alert. The sound that had caught Kaiser's attention became audible to Marcus as well, the soft crunch of footsteps on dried pine needles, moving slowly but deliberately through the underbrush. Someone else was in these woods, and they were trying to move stealthily. Marcus's heart rate increased as he realized they might have stumbled into an active crime scene rather than discovering the aftermath of a suicide. Marcus grabbed Kaiser's collar and slowly backed away from the hanging body, keeping his eyes fixed on the thicket where the sounds were coming from. His mind raced through possible scenarios. If this was indeed a murder made to look like suicide, the perpetrator might still be in the area, possibly watching to see who would discover the body. The isolation of this location made it an ideal spot for someone to commit a crime and escape undetected. The footsteps grew closer, and Marcus could hear the sound of branches being pushed aside. Kaiser was trembling with controlled aggression, every muscle in his body coiled and ready to spring into action. The dog's training was evident in his restraint. He was waiting for Marcus's command before taking any aggressive action. Through the dense foliage, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement. A figure in dark clothing was making their way through the trees, moving with purpose rather than the random wandering of a hiker. The person appeared to be heading directly toward their location, as if they knew exactly where the hanging body could be found. Marcus made a quick decision. He could not outrun an unknown assailant through unfamiliar forest terrain, especially while trying to control Kaiser and potentially protect evidence. Instead, he decided to use the element of surprise to his advantage. He positioned himself behind a large pine tree, keeping the hanging body between himself and the approaching figure, and prepared to observe whoever was approaching. The footsteps stopped suddenly, and Marcus heard a voice cursing softly in the distance. Whoever was out there had apparently spotted something unexpected, possibly Marcus's truck parked on the dirt road. The voice was male, rough and agitated, and definitely not that of an innocent hiker who had stumbled upon a tragic scene. Kaiser's growling intensified, and Marcus had to grip the dog's collar tighter to prevent him from charging toward the threat. The German shepherd's protective instincts were in full force, and he clearly perceived the approaching stranger as a danger to both himself and Marcus. The dog's training as a military working animal was evident in his controlled aggression and his willingness to wait for commands, despite his obvious desire to neutralize the threat. Marcus strained to hear more, trying to determine how many people might be approaching and whether they were armed. The isolation that had initially attracted him to this area was now working against him, as help was miles away and his cell phone remained useless. He realized that he and Kaiser might be the only witnesses to whatever had really happened to the man hanging from the tree, and that knowledge made them both potential targets. The mysterious figure in the woods had gone silent, but Marcus could sense a presence watching them. Kaiser remained tense beside him, his ears rotating like radar dishes trying to pinpoint the exact location of the threat. Minutes passed like hours as Marcus weighed his options, knowing that any decision could mean the difference between life and death. Then, without warning, The silence was broken by the sound of rapid footsteps moving away from their position. Whoever had been approaching was now retreating, crashing through the underbrush with less concern for stealth. Marcus heard what sounded like a vehicle engine starting in the distance, followed by the squeal of tires on gravel as someone made a hasty escape. Kaiser relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained fixed on the direction where the sounds had originated. Marcus waited several more minutes before emerging from behind the tree, wanting to ensure that the retreat was not a trap designed to draw him into the open. His military experience had taught him that patience often meant survival, and he was not about to take unnecessary risks. When he finally approached the hanging body again, Marcus noticed something he had missed earlier. The dead man's wallet was lying on the ground near the overturned step stool, its contents scattered as if someone had rifled through it hastily. Driver's license, credit cards, and family photos were spread across the pine needles, but no cash was visible. This detail strengthened Marcus's suspicion that this was not a simple suicide. Kaiser had resumed his investigation of the disturbed earth around the base of the tree, and his behavior was drawing Marcus's attention to specific areas. The dog's nose led him to what appeared to be a second set of footprints in the soft soil, clearly different from the boots worn by the hanging victim. These prints were from a larger shoe with a distinctive tread pattern, and they led away from the tree toward the same thicket where the mysterious observer had been hiding. Marcus's mind began piecing together a possible sequence of events. The scattered wallet contents, the defensive wounds on the victim's hands, the amateurish knotwork, and now the evidence of a second person at the scene all pointed toward murder. Someone had killed this man and attempted to stage it as a suicide, but they had done a poor job of covering their tracks. The sound of approaching sirens in the distance caught Marcus by surprise. He had not called for help yet, which meant someone else had reported the incident. His truck was the only vehicle visible in the area, and the mysterious figure who had fled had apparently decided to involve law enforcement. Marcus realized he was about to become the primary suspect in what appeared to be a homicide investigation. Kaiser sensed the approaching vehicles and positioned himself protectively beside Marcus, his training telling him to be ready for whatever came next. The sirens grew louder, and soon Marcus could see flashing lights through the trees as multiple police vehicles made their way up the winding forest road. Sheriff's deputies emerged from their vehicles with weapons drawn, treating Marcus as a potential threat until the situation could be assessed. Marcus raised his hand slowly and called out his military identification, hoping his veteran status might help establish his credibility. Kaiser remained perfectly still beside him, displaying the discipline that had made him valuable as a military working dog. Deputy Sarah Chen approached cautiously, her weapon lowered but ready. She had dealt with Marcus before during a minor traffic violation several months earlier, and remembered him as a polite, respectful veteran who kept to himself. Her familiarity with him helped diffuse the immediate tension, but the serious nature of the scene meant that everyone would be treated as a potential suspect until the investigation could determine what had actually happened. Marcus explained how he and Kaiser had discovered the body, carefully describing the dog's unusual behavior and the mysterious figure they had encountered in the woods. He pointed out the scattered wallet contents and the second set of footprints, sharing his military-trained observations about the inconsistencies that suggested this was not a suicide. Deputy Chen listened carefully while other officers secured the scene and called for the county coroner and crime scene investigators. She noticed Kaiser's calm, disciplined behavior and recognized the signs of a well-trained working dog. The German Shepherd's obvious attachment to Marcus and his protective but non-aggressive stance helped support Marcus's credibility as a witness rather than a suspect. As more law enforcement personnel arrived, Marcus found himself being questioned extensively about his movements that morning and his relationship to the victim. He had never seen the dead man before, which was not surprising given the rural nature of the area and the fact that Marcus kept largely to himself. The victim's driver's license identified him as Robert Mitchell, a local handyman who lived about 15 miles away in the nearest town. The crime scene investigators were particularly interested in Kaiser's behavior and asked Marcus to walk them through exactly how the dog had alerted him to the presence of the body. Marcus explained the search and rescue training that Kaiser had received and how the dog's reactions had been unusual from the very beginning. suggesting he had sensed something more than just a deceased person. Detective Ray Morrison arrived at the scene 2 hours later, bringing with him 20 years of homicide investigation experience and a reputation for solving cases that others had written off as accidents or suicides. He immediately recognized the inconsistencies that Marcus had pointed out and began treating the death as a potential homicide rather than a suicide. Morrison was particularly interested in the timeline of events and the mysterious figure that Marcus and Kaiser had detected in the woods. The fact that someone had called in the discovery of the body before Marcus had been able to reach a phone suggested that the caller was either another witness or potentially the perpetrator trying to control the narrative of the investigation. The detective questioned Marcus extensively about his military background and his relationship with Kaiser. Morrison had worked with police K-9 units throughout his career and understood the value of a well-trained dog's instincts. Kaiser's behavior patterns, as described by Marcus, suggested that the German Shepherd had detected multiple human scents at the scene, which supported the theory that Robert Mitchell had not died alone. Crime scene. Investigators confirmed that the rope used in the hanging showed signs of having been tied by someone with limited knowledge of proper knot construction. The noose was functional but crudely made, unlike what would be expected from someone who had researched suicide methods. Additionally, the angle of the rope burns on Mitchell's neck suggested that he had been struggling against the restraint rather than allowing his full body weight to be supported by it. The medical examiner's preliminary assessment revealed that Mitchell had been deceased for approximately 6 to 8 hours before Marcus discovered the body. This timeline placed the time of death sometime between midnight and 2 in the morning, well before Marcus and Kaiser had begun their morning routine. However, it also meant that whoever had been watching them from the woods had returned to the scene many hours after the initial crime. Detective Morrison began developing a theory that the perpetrator had staged the suicide scene during the night but had returned in the morning to ensure that the body would be discovered and the suicide narrative would be accepted. The arrival of Marcus and Kaiser had disrupted this plan, forcing the killer to flee before they could complete whatever they had intended to do. The investigation into Robert Mitchell's background revealed a complex web of financial troubles and personal conflicts that provided multiple motives for murder. Mitchell had been involved in a bitter custody dispute with his ex-wife, owed significant money to several local contractors, and had recently been threatened by a loan shark from the nearest city. Any one of these situations could have escalated to violence. Kaiser continued to display unusual behavior even after the body had been removed from the scene. The German Shepherd kept returning to specific areas around the base of the tree, pawing at the ground and whining softly. Detective Morrison, respecting the dog's training and instincts, authorized a more thorough search of the areas that had captured Kaiser's attention. The expanded search revealed a crucial piece of evidence that had been overlooked during the initial investigation. Buried beneath a thin layer of pine needles and soil, crime scene investigators found a cell phone that belonged to Robert Mitchell. The phone's last incoming call had been received at 11:47 p.m. the previous night, and the caller ID showed a number that was registered to a local business owner named Frank Costello. Costello owned a small construction company and had employed Mitchell as a subcontractor on several projects over the past year. Their business relationship had reportedly soured recently over a payment dispute, with Mitchell claiming that Costello owed him nearly $8,000 for completed work. The phone record showed multiple heated conversations between the two men in the weeks leading up to Mitchell's death. When Detective Morrison attempted to contact Costello for questioning, he discovered that the man had failed to report to work that morning and was not answering his phone. A visit to Costello's home address revealed that his truck was missing, and neighbors reported hearing him leave his property around 5 in the morning, driving unusually fast and appearing agitated. Marcus found himself becoming an integral part of the investigation, not just as a witness but as a partner with Kaiser in tracking down additional evidence. Morrison recognized the value of the German Shepherd's training and asked Marcus if he and Kaiser would be willing to assist in searching Costello's property and business premises for any signs of evidence related to Mitchell's murder. The search of Costello's construction yard yielded immediate results when Kaiser alerted to a specific area near a storage shed. Buried beneath construction debris, investigators found bloody clothing that appeared to match Costello's size and style preferences. Laboratory analysis would later confirm that the blood belonged to Robert Mitchell, providing a direct link between the two men and the crime scene. Kaiser's continued alerts led investigators to a section of disturbed earth behind Costello's office building. Excavation revealed a makeshift grave that contained rope identical to what had been used in Mitchell's hanging, along with work gloves that bore both men's DNA. The evidence painted a clear picture of premeditated murder, followed by an elaborate attempt to stage the scene as a suicide. The investigation revealed that Costello had lured Mitchell to the remote forest location under the pretense of discussing their payment dispute. Instead of negotiating, Costello had attacked Mitchell and ultimately killed him before attempting to make the death appear self-inflicted. The crude knotwork and other inconsistencies in the staging had been the result of Costello's lack of experience with such deception and his panic about covering up his crime. The manhunt for Frank Costello intensified as law enforcement agencies across 3 states joined the search for the fugitive construction contractor. Detective Morrison coordinated with federal authorities, knowing that Costello's head start and knowledge of remote construction sites throughout the region would make him difficult to track using conventional methods. Marcus volunteered to continue, assisting with the investigation, and Morrison gladly accepted the offer. Kaiser's exceptional tracking abilities and Marcus's military experience made them a valuable asset in the search effort. The German Shepherd had proven his worth multiple times already, and his connection to the original crime scene gave him a unique familiarity with Costello's scent profile. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered that Costello had been using his construction company's credit card to purchase fuel and supplies. The electronic trail showed him moving north toward the Canadian border, apparently hoping to escape jurisdiction and disappear into the wilderness. His most recent purchase had been at a truck stop just 40 miles from Marcus's cabin, suggesting that Costello was still in the general area. Kaiser's tracking abilities became crucial when the electronic trail went cold, after Costello abandoned his truck at an abandoned logging camp deep in the national forest. The construction contractor had apparently planned this escape route in advance, stockpiling supplies and preparing hiding places throughout the rugged terrain. His knowledge of the area's logging roads and abandoned structures gave him significant advantages in evading capture. Marcus and Kaiser joined a specialized search team that included state police, K-9 units, and federal marshals with wilderness tracking experience. The German Shepherd's superior training and his familiarity with Costello's scent from the crime scene evidence made him the lead tracking dog in the operation. The team moved systematically through the forest, following faint trails and investigating abandoned buildings where Costello might be hiding. On the 3rd day of the intensive search, Kaiser detected a scent trail that led to an old hunting cabin nestled deep in a remote valley. The cabin appeared abandoned from a distance, but Kaiser's behavior indicated that someone had been there recently. Marcus recognized the same alertness and focus that the dog had displayed at the original crime scene, confirming that they were on the right track. The tactical team surrounded the cabin before dawn, hoping to capture Costello while he slept. However, when they breached the structure, they found it empty except for evidence that someone had been living there for several days. Fresh food supplies, bedding, and personal items confirmed that Costello had indeed been using the cabin as a hideout, but he had apparently fled during the night. Kaiser immediately picked up a fresh scent trail leading away from the cabin toward a series of rocky ridges that would provide excellent hiding places for a fugitive familiar with the terrain. The search team followed the trail for several miles through increasingly difficult terrain, with Kaiser maintaining focus despite the challenging conditions and competing scents from wildlife in the area. The pursuit led to a dramatic confrontation when the search team cornered Costello on a narrow ledge, overlooking a deep ravine. The fugitive had armed himself with a hunting rifle found in the cabin and was prepared to fight rather than surrender. He shouted threats and accusations, claiming that Mitchell had deserved to die and that the investigation was part of a conspiracy against honest businessmen. Marcus found himself in a position similar to combat situations he had faced during his military service, but this time, he was protecting civilian law enforcement officers rather than fellow soldiers. Kaiser remained perfectly disciplined beside him, waiting for commands while staying alert to any sudden movements from the armed suspect. Detective Morrison attempted to negotiate with Costello, trying to convince him to surrender peacefully rather than face additional charges for threatening law enforcement officers. The construction contractor's mental state appeared to be deteriorating rapidly, and his responses became increasingly erratic and violent as the standoff continued. The situation reached a critical point when Costello began firing randomly in the direction of the search team, forcing everyone to take cover behind rocks and trees. Marcus realized that his military training and Kaiser's abilities might be the key to ending the standoff without additional casualties. He proposed a flanking maneuver that would allow them to approach Costello from an unexpected angle while the main team maintained his attention. Morrison was reluctant to put a civilian in danger, but he recognized that Marcus's combat experience and Kaiser's training made them uniquely qualified for such an operation. The detective authorized the flanking attempt after ensuring that Marcus understood the risks and had proper backup support from armed officers positioned to provide covering fire if needed. Marcus and Kaiser moved carefully through the rocky terrain, using the natural cover to approach Costello's position without being detected. The German Shepherd's silent movement and ability to follow hand signals proved invaluable as they navigated the treacherous landscape. Their military training created a level of coordination that would have been impossible to achieve. With an ordinary civilian and pet combination, the plan succeeded when Kaiser created a distraction by appearing on Costello's flank, drawing the fugitive's attention and rifle fire away from Marcus's actual position. This allowed Marcus to close the distance and tackle Costello before he could reload or reposition his weapon. The construction contractor's capture ended the manhunt and closed the final chapter of Robert Mitchell's murder investigation. The arrest of Frank Costello brought closure to one of the most complex murder investigations in the county's history, but it also revealed the horrific truth that Marcus and Kaiser had unknowingly witnessed the aftermath of a brutal killing designed to look like suicide. The evidence gathered during the investigation painted a picture of premeditated murder motivated by greed and desperation. During his interrogation, Costello confessed to luring Robert Mitchell to the remote forest location under the pretense of finally paying the money he owed for construction work. Instead, Costello had attacked Mitchell with a tire iron, beating him severely before strangling him with rope and attempting to stage the scene as a suicide. The construction contractor's lack of experience with such deception had resulted in the obvious inconsistencies that Marcus and Detective Morrison had immediately noticed. The most disturbing revelation came when Costello admitted that he had returned to the crime scene that morning to plant additional evidence that would strengthen the suicide narrative. He had been hiding in the woods waiting for an opportunity to approach the body again, when Marcus and Kaiser had arrived unexpectedly. Their presence had forced him to flee before completing his plan to leave a fake suicide note in Mitchell's handwriting. Marcus realized that he and Kaiser had likely prevented Costello from successfully covering up his crime. Without their intervention and the German Shepherd's exceptional tracking abilities, the murder might have been classified as a suicide, and the real killer would have escaped justice. This knowledge brought both satisfaction and a sobering awareness of how close a murderer had come to evading accountability for his actions. The trial of Frank Costello became a showcase for the importance of proper crime scene investigation and the value of trained working dogs in law enforcement. Kaiser's role in discovering crucial evidence and tracking the fugitive killer was highlighted throughout the proceedings, earning the German Shepherd recognition from multiple law enforcement agencies and animal welfare organizations. Detective Morrison testified extensively about how Marcus's military training and Kaiser's search and rescue background had contributed to solving the case. The partnership between the veteran and his dog demonstrated the potential for civilian law enforcement cooperation in complex investigations, leading to discussions about formalizing such relationships in future cases. Costello was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including the DNA evidence found at his property, the electronic trail of his movements, and his own confession during the manhunt. Robert Mitchell's family finally had justice for their loved one's death and closure after months of uncertainty. The Experience transformed Marcus's quiet retirement from military service into an unexpected second career in civilian law enforcement assistance. Several police departments approached him about training programs that would pair veteran handlers with retired military working dogs, creating teams that could assist in search and rescue operations, crime scene investigations, and fugitive tracking missions. Marcus accepted a position as a civilian consultant with the sheriff's department, allowing him and Kaiser to continue working together while helping train other handler dog teams. Their success in the Mitchell murder case had demonstrated the value of such partnerships and created opportunities for other veterans to find meaningful work using skills developed during their military service. Kaiser received formal recognition as an honorary member of the Sheriff's Department K-9 unit, complete with his own badge and official status as a working law enforcement animal. The German Shepherd's exceptional performance during the investigation and manhunt had proven that retired military working dogs could successfully transition to civilian law enforcement roles with proper handling and support. The case also led to improvements in how potential suicide scenes are investigated in rural areas, with greater emphasis on looking for signs of foul play and more thorough evidence collection procedures. Marcus's military-trained observations about the inconsistencies in the crime scene staging became part of training materials used to educate law enforcement officers about recognizing staged suicide scenes. For Marcus personally, the experience provided a sense of purpose and mission that he had been missing since leaving military service. Working with Kaiser to solve crimes and help bring dangerous criminals to justice gave both of them a way to continue serving their community while using the specialized skills they had developed during their years of military training and deployment. The partnership between Marcus and Kaiser continued for several more years, during which they assisted in solving dozens of cases ranging from missing person searches to complex criminal investigations. Their success rate and the bond between veteran and working dog became legendary within law enforcement circles, inspiring similar programs across the country and providing a model for how retired military personnel and animals could continue contributing to public safety and civilian life. The case of Robert Mitchell's murder remained a defining moment in both Marcus's and Kaiser's post-military careers, proving that their skills and dedication could make a real difference in seeking justice for victims and protecting innocent people from dangerous criminals who thought they could commit the perfect crime and escape responsibility for their actions.